Before we move on to creating an entire web page layout, let's look at some more basic tags to help you get used to them. The first one we've seen so far is P for paragraph. It looks something like that. When you want to create a paragraph in Design View, you simply press Return. Then begin typing, and Dreamweaver will place in yet another paragraph. If you wanted to move down just a single line, you can use Shift and Return to place in a line break. The tag for a line break is BR by itself. So because BR as a tag doesn't affect an entire range of content like a paragraph does, it only needs a single tag without a closing. So let's take a look at some more of these tags. So if we had a sentence like this, and we wanted to affect certain parts of it. So for example, if we wanted the word sentence to be emboldened, we could use the strong tag. And if I click on Design View, you can see that sentence only is affected by that. If I wanted to say sentence like was going to be emboldened, I'd simply move the strong tag to after it. Therefore, both of those words are inside the strong tags. So after the opening and before the closing. If I wanted to, for example, make something italicized, I would use the I tag. What you'll notice is as soon as you start typing the closing and press /, Dreamweaver will finish that off for you. So you can see that like is still inside the strong, and now we have a set of I tags inside there too, which is making it italic. So there's just a few tags that you could use to style text. If you wanted to create some headings, you have the option of using headings of sizes 1 through to 6. Heading 1 is the biggest, and in terms of Google priority, it's deemed the most important. So if we put in, for example, the words largest heading and wrap that inside H1, you'll see that there's a large heading there. Now, these are things that HTML has predefined sizes for. And you can see that also they have their own padding or margins above and below them to create spacing around those headings. So before there was CSS, so something to style the look of your text content in general, we simply had headings and paragraphs that you could put in. So when you create your web pages, you should always use headings through 1 to 6 in order to specify how important certain content is. So an H1 will be the very top of the page and really lay out what the overall title of that area of content is, and then through to H6 will be a very unimportant part, but maybe more important than a paragraph. So those are headings and paragraphs. Another thing you might want to do is to put in a list. So if you just wanted a bulleted list, you could use a UL and LIs, which are list items. So UL is unordered list. So if I put in 2 items like that, it will look like this. So the UL itself moves that stuff over, so it spaces it out. And hopefully what you've noticed is that I'm spacing out my code too. That's to help me understand where it is in the scheme of things. So I've used the tab key on the keyboard to move these lines of code over from the left-hand edge of the document, because that shows me that they're inside the body. I've then moved the list items inside the UL over to show me that they're inside that tag. That just helps me read my HTML codes, keeps it nice and neat, and allows me to diagnose any problems as I go along. So another way of doing that, if you wanted to move an entire block or an entire line, is just to select by dragging over the line numbers in Dreamweaver, and then you've got these little buttons here called indent and outdent, and you can use those to move over a certain number of tabs. So those are some basic kind of tags. The last one we'll look at very briefly is anchor tags, which allow you to make a hyperlink. So normally we'd just write something like this if we were writing a tag. But an anchor tag by itself doesn't do anything, because we need to specify what that anchor tag is going to point at. And this is where we look at the first example of a parameter inside our tags. So most of these tags we've looked at so far don't have any settings, except for meta, which has got two parameters, but one of them's got two different settings. So the anchor tag is going to have by default at least one parameter, and that is href, hyperlink reference to where it's going to send the user when they click on that piece of text. So any parameter you see will be a word or phrase with no spaces, and then an equal symbol, and then something inside inverted commas. And what you can do is simply put in a reference to somewhere you're sending. So if it's an external website, for example, we might send them to apple.com, and I'll change that text to say this is the link to Apple. And you can see the default look of a hyperlink there, this blue and underlined look. Okay, so when the user clicks on that, they'll be taken over to the Apple website. Okay, so that's just some basic tags so far. So before we continue, we're just going to save our first page into our root folder. So it should select that by default if you set up your site correctly in the first video. And the first page we ever make is always going to be called index.html. No matter what you're working in, if you're working in PHP, it will be index.php. So index is the name of the file because when web browsers look into a folder, they look for a particularly named file called index. So rather than sending someone to a web address such as mysite.com/homepage.html, we always have this predetermined thing called index, which we can name our file, and that will be what the browser opens by default. So we'll save that into the root folder, and you should then see that it also appears in your file browser on the right hand side. So that's just some basic tags. Next thing we'll do is look at how we can style them with something called CSS.